Bun găsit la emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere! Azi ne reîntâlnim cu Bruce Lipton pentru un al treilea set de videoclipuri pregătite de el, montate și ilustrate, care ne transmit un mesaj de optimism și sănătate. O să menționez faptul că profesorul Bruce Lipton are în prezent un orar formidabil de strâns și nu am putut programa din timp un interviu, dar domnia sa mi-a oferit drepturile de utilizare și difuzare a oricăror din materialele produse sub numele său, adică videoclipuri, DVD-uri, cărți și articole. Din când în când, Bruce Lipton oferă abonaților săi de pe contul de YouTube scurte prezentări ale unor idei esențiale. Le-am colecționat pe întreaga durată a pandemiei cu scopul includerii lor în câteva episoade Știință și Cunoaștere. Am realizat integral traducerile, subtitrările și sincronizările, așa că nu-mi rămâne altceva de spus decât vizionare plăcută cu o nouă înțelegere a biologiei în prezentarea condensată și ilustrată de către profesorul Dr. Bruce Lipton. O să menționez din nou faptul că în toate aceste videoclipuri produse de Bruce Lipton există foarte multe metafore. Asta înseamnă că dumneavoastră aveți nevoie să înțelegeți sensul metaforic al ideilor și frazelor sale. Acolo unde a fost posibil am adăugat ghilimele sau anumite note între paranteze, dar în multe alte situații nu a fost posibil și de aceea rugămintea mea este de a acorda multă îngăduință și atenție la vizionarea acestor materiale. A doua problemă este legată de viteza foarte mare de vorbit pe care o are profesorul Bruce Lipton și care este un adevărat maraton. În multe locuri a fost nevoie să fac adaptări pentru a scurta numărul de cuvinte afișate simultan pe ecran, dar chiar și așa s-ar putea să nu fie de ajuns. Din acest motiv vă rog să revizionați aceste emisiuni ori de câte ori se vor putea redifuza la TVR Cluj pentru a pătrunde esența tuturor ideilor sale, având în vedere faptul că unele lucruri au scăpat atenției dumneavoastră. În primul material veți afla câteva idei despre o nouă înțelegere a cancerului și care ar fi principalele elemente de care aveți nevoie pentru a preveni apariția bolii. Prevenția e incomparabil mai ușoară decât vindecarea, iar efortul despre care vorbește Bruce Lipton pentru a face această prevenție este incomparabil mai mic decât cel necesar vindecării.
Hi, dear friends, cultural creators and seekers everywhere. Bruce here. Well, today I have a very important story to talk about, a story about cancer. And why I'm bringing this up is in today's world, there's chaos all over the planet, but contributing to that chaos is a global health problem. All around the world, there's a health crisis. One of the leading illnesses on this planet is called cancer. Well, interesting enough, through the evolution of our understanding of genetics and behavior, we came to a belief of something called genetic determinism. And that belief is that genes turn on and off and in the process control the character of our lives. A very simple understanding that is if you believe in genetic determinism, then you recognize a person is actually a victim of their heredity. If there's cancer running in a family, then there's a belief that the gene that causes that cancer will manifest in their lives. And so genetic determinism actually causes us to have a very negative thought that, oh my goodness, I am susceptible to what's running in the family. And then of course, since we understand the new science of epigenetics versus genetics, the whole story changes. Because when we believed in genetics, determinism meant that genes control the character of your life. But the new science of epigenetics changes the story, because epigenetics reveals that consciousness is controlling your life. There is no gene that causes cancer. That's an absolute scientific fact. There's no gene, if you possess it, you will automatically get cancer. So I said, well, we've created a whole world of oncogenes, cancer genes. I go, those are genes that are associated with the cancer, but they're not genes that cause the cancer. To give a very big example that is familiar to a lot of our audience is a reference to the breast cancer gene, which is, in the minds of women, possession of that gene means that cancer is some inevitable part of their future, breast cancer. And then I bring up a very important fact. 50% of the women that have the gene never get the cancer. Well, there's an important conclusion right there, and it says possession of the gene itself does not cause cancer. It's activated, that gene is activated. The whole idea of what is called self-emergence, meaning genes turn on and off, that's a false belief that we were programmed with. Genes cannot control their activity. It's the environment that controls the activity, and that's the foundation of the science of epigenetics, control above the genes. And consciousness is what interprets that environment and controls our genetics. And if we're not living in health and harmony in the world that we're in, repressed anger, repressed emotions such as fear or sadness, these repressed emotions are like a boiling cauldron in the body, and these emotions are what can engage a gene that's called an oncogene. And so the significance about this is our conventional understanding has been genes cause cancer, which then leads to how do you treat it? And they say, well, then you have to recognize that tumor cells are wayward cells doing what they want, and the only thing you can do to cure the cancer is eliminate the tumor cells. Radiation, surgery, chemotherapy are applied to eliminate the cancer cells. But we have to stop right now for a very important reason. Are the cancer cells the cause, the problem overall? And I go, a cancer cell has a genetic disposition to make cancer. And I go, yeah, but does the gene cause the cancer? And the answer is no. It was the consciousness that caused it. So a cancer, when it manifests, is a symptom of consciousness not in harmony. But it's not that people have a conscious desire to get a cancer. Then where is consciousness coming from for that cancer? And the answer is, well, there are actually two minds. There's the conscious creative mind connected to our identity, our source, our spirituality, but there's a subconscious mind, which is a database of programs that we acquire during our life experiences. So the important part is this. I'm not saying that consciousness, meaning I want to have cancer, is what caused the cancer. What I'm saying is it's a subconscious program expressing a disharmony with the character's life in the world in which they're living. Cancer has been around for a long time, and people have been contributing money. Billions and billions of dollars have been contributed to cancer research to resolve the problem. And I go, all of this time, since 1940, when we actually introduced chemotherapy, since that time, we've been using the old techniques to try to cure cancer in spite of all the research. The significance is that the research that we have doesn't support the healing of cancer. Back in the late 60s, when I was doing my experiments on all of this new insight about how environment was controlling the genes, I did not get a lot of support from all of my colleagues because they were still involved with the belief of genetic determinism. But over time, there's now a newer understanding that is coming forth saying exactly what the research I did revealed, and that is the consciousness of the patient is what is altering epigenetic expression of the cancer. This is a complete paradigm change from looking at genes controlling cancer to recognizing that consciousness is controlling cancer. Science, being based on Newtonian physics, separated the universe into matter and energy, and the body, being matter, could only be dealt with by dealing with the physical body. And that's why when cancer research started, they were looking at what physical way they could intervene to stop the cancer, which of course led to the surgery, the radiation, the chemotherapy. But when quantum physics entered the world, it said that the material aspect of our universe is an illusion of energy, that everything is energy. So if we start looking at cancer as a consequence of energy, then if we look at the source of that cancer, we can now go back and say the source of that cancer was energy. The energy that we're specifically talking about influencing cancer is the energy of the brain in consciousness and in subconscious behavior. When we look at the body, it's not a single entity, it's actually a community of 50 trillion cells. Interesting point is the mind is the equivalent of a government that talks to and organizes the functions of those cells. And while we've been blaming the cells for disease, it turns out less than 1% of disease is actually connected to the genetics of the cells. That most of it is from the government, the consciousness that is controlling the 50 trillion cells in your body. So we've misdirected our healing approach because we've been focusing on the cells as where the problem is, but the cells are just responding to the consciousness. So if you want to change cancer, it's not eliminate the cells, but it's to rewrite the consciousness. And all of us can do this. I hope this insight is really helpful. For the reason is this: cancer is increasing in our world today because we're out of harmony with the world as a population. And rather than trying to kill cancer cells, which are the symptom, it's time for us to wake up and realize that to eliminate cancer, we have to go to the source. And the source of the cancer is not the genes. Let's stop going first into the chemotherapy, the radiation, the surgery, And let's start looking at cancer as an energy of dysfunction. And that by energy changing of the consciousness and the belief issues, that is the healing step in cancer. And it's available to all of us. And no surgery, no radiation, no pharmaceutical biochemicals of destruction. It's energy.
În următorul material, Bruce Lipton ne explică funcționarea sistemului imunitar într-o prezentare vie și inteligibilă pentru toți cei care nu suntem specialiști. Niciodată până acum nu am reușit să aprofundez acest subiect și să-l înțeleg la modul practic, astfel încât să-mi fie de folos în viața de zi cu zi. Dar Bruce Lipton are un dar excepțional de a simplifica lucrurile, de a folosi metafore intuitive și vă garantez că ceea ce veți vedea în continuare va fi absolut fascinant și interesant. În plus, față de această nouă înțelegere a sistemului imunitar, Bruce Lipton va prezenta și o exemplificare pe COVID-19, deoarece principiul este valabil și se poate extinde și spre alte posibile pandemii viitoare, dacă vor mai apare. Va fi explicat mecanismul COVID-19 și motivele pentru care totuși acest virus a fost destul de periculos pentru cei care au avut sistemul imunitar compromis. Având la bază aceste noi înțelegeri ale mecanismelor virale și ale sistemului imunitar, dumneavoastră puteți lua decizii din timp pentru a vă pregăti, a preveni și chiar a vindeca aproape orice infecție virală prezentă sau viitoare. Există 4 lucruri foarte importante care ajută la menținerea unui sistem imunitar performant, iar acestea sunt prezentate de către Bruce Lipton la finalul acestui material.
Hi, dear friends, cultural creatives and seekers everywhere. Bruce back with a very interesting story today. A story about the immune system. Yes, I know every day with COVID you hear about the immune system this, the immune system that. Well, what is the immune system? I mean, if I ask you what the digestive system is, you'd probably say, yes, oh yeah, there's the mouth and the esophagus and the stomach and the intestines. You get all those pieces. I say, what is the immune system? Well, generally it's something that protects me. From what? From things that get inside your body. And I said, well, why should things want to get inside my body in the first place? Let's just set up a scenario. You're out there in the world, and I drop you off in the wilderness, and I say, okay, survive. And one of the things you have to do is start finding food. And you're going to spend all your time, maybe find nothing, and you're going to be looking for food. And here's an alternative vision. I drop you out in an eat-all-you-can buffet. Well, you don't have to worry about food. It's being served to you all the time. What does this have to do with the immune system? And I go like this. Bacteria, parasites that live out in the environment have to struggle for their survival to find food. But underneath your skin, the tissues inside your body are flush with fluid from the blood. And in that fluid are all the nutrients and elements necessary for growth. So if a bacteria could find itself inside to your body, it would be sitting pretty. All it'd have to do is just sit there, and food would be constantly delivered from an individual circulatory system. So the idea is, well, yeah, then obviously this is a nice environment that invasive organisms would like to find themselves in because it's like free food, well, you know, no probs. So, okay, so what does this mean? It says, well, then we have to have a defense system. Because if invasive organisms get in there, not only will they utilize the food we make, but they could create a toxic waste environment that could actually undermine our health. So we can't afford to have invasive organisms come into us and take over. And the immune system's job is an internal protection system, as opposed to, for example, the adrenal system, fight or flight, which protects you from threats on the outside. Immune system protects you from threats on the inside. So I said, well, how does it work? Well, the immune system is an intelligent system. Because what is the function of the immune system? To go out into the world of their body and look for things that are new, that came in, and then not only recognize them, but learn about them so that they could create antibodies, for example, to effectively knock them out. So the immune system's character is learning and memory. I go, wow, what a coincidence. This is the character of the nervous system. Point. The immune system is an extension of the nervous system, learning and memory about the environment in which you live. So I said, well, how does it work? Well, I say that there are organisms that prefer to find the interior of our body as a place to live because it's so much easier for them just to sit there and live off of your energy and your nourishment. So the old story is, the immune system protects self, my body, against invading organisms as everything else is called not self. Well, I go, that's a crude insight, but it's not anywhere near accurate for a simple reason. The immune system identifies things that get into the body that cause disruption of the system. And its job is to identify them, mark them, and eliminate them. And I go, but there are many organisms that live with us that are part of us. It's called the microbiome. Thousands of species of organisms, bacteria and parasites living with us. I say, the immune system doesn't attack them. The reason is this. They support our viability. They support who we are. So self versus not self, that's not the discriminating factor of the immune system. Factor of the immune system is anything that's disruptive to the system. Well, guess what? That not only includes organisms that come from the outside, but even our own cells, if they go rogue, like go into a cancer state, the immune system's job is to eliminate them. So basically, the function of the immune system is to keep harmony in the system. Any organism that comes in that disrupts harmony, function of the immune system, eliminate it. There's an intelligence to it. And it's not self versus not self. It's versus anything that brings harmony versus anything that disturbs harmony in the system. That's the focus of the immune system. The immune system represents a whole population and community of cells inside the body. But here's an interesting fact. The most important component of the immune system isn't even the immune system. The body is protected by a layer of skin. Skin represents an organization of cells forming like a membrane, a layer. It's called epithelium. Every opening of the body is lined by epithelium. So I say, yes, the throat has an epithelium as you go in, okay? The nose has an epithelium. The ears have an epithelium. The respiratory, the digestive system, the excretory, the reproductive system. Point is very simple. Every system that's connected to the outside of the body has a protective layer of epithelium as a border to prevent infection into the system. The skin, for example, is a barrier that prevents things from attacking you. So here's the important part. The skin, and now we know there's another layer called the microbiome, which consists of bacteria and elements like that, are two layers, microbiome on top of the epithelium, and underneath is the inside of the body. These two layers aren't part, by definition, of the immune system, but they represent the most important part of the immune system because with these two barriers, they eliminate 99.99% of any infective agent. It doesn't even get past those barriers. The immune system that we talk about with the cellular involvement is if the invasive organism gets under the barrier. Now it's inside an environment, and the function of the policing of that environment is due to the immune system. So I said, well, how can I explain it to you in a very simple way? So I said, here's a picture. Let's start off with this. Here's an aquarium. There's fish in the aquarium. There's water in the aquarium. And there's a border all the way around the aquarium that contains the water and the fish. Well, in addition to that, if you have an aquarium, guess what? You have to filter the water. So you put in a pump that takes water out, filters it, and then puts it back into the system. So now we have a pump. And now a very important aspect of that pump, which represents the circulatory system, is that I could add nutrients to that pump. So as it's pumping the fluid through the body, it's also pumping nutrients throughout the body. So I said, cool. So here's our picture of the aquarium. The pump is working. Food elements are coming out with the fluid, and this draws the fish to the pump, the vascular system, the equivalent. I go, so why is this relevant? I said, well, it's a circulatory system, filtering the water, adding the water back in, and then taking the water out and filtering again. And then I said, well, there's one little component we have to add to that. And I say, what is it? And I say, when the fluid is removed from the blood, by pressure, blood pressure, what happens is large blood vessels like an artery shrink down to a small blood vessel like a capillary. So you have a large amount of fluid coming in and then a little tiny vessel to carry all that fluid out. Well, that means there's a pressure on this side of the small vessel, blood pressure. And I say, what does that mean? Well, then as the fluid is being pushed through the capillary, which is lined by epithelial cells, that the fluid pressure causes the fluid in the blood, which we call lymph, to leak out between the cells lining a blood vessel. So in a state of nourishment, the blood that's coming to the area of the body, carrying red cells, which have oxygen in them, and fluid, the serum in the blood, which has all the building blocks, the nutrients and hormones and growth factors, is carried in the fluid. In a conventional situation, blood pressure causes that fluid to leak out. That fluid carrying nutrition nourishes the cells. And at the other end of the capillary where it joins the vein, a process called osmosis, which drives the fluid from the outside back into the capillary, helps return the fluid that came out at the front of the capillary to come back in at the end. Now there's only one problem. More fluid is coming out at the front of the capillary than is going back in at the other end of the capillary. The point is, then the blood is continually putting more fluid into the body than is being taken back into the blood again. So I said, wow, well, you can't live very long like that because eventually then all the blood fluid would be leaked out and you wouldn't have any blood fluid in your circulatory system. Point is very simple. At this point, we need to return the extra fluid. I say, there's the equivalent of a floor drain, a drain in the tissue. All it does is collect the extra fluid out of the tissue, bring it through a pipe and carry it back, filter it, and then drop it back into the heart so that we can replace the fluid that was coming out. Okay, so this means capillaries are nourishing. They don't let red cells out. They let the oxygen out. They let the nutrition dissolved in the fluid out. So the blood cells don't come out. They just keep moving down the capillary, but pressure pushes the fluid out, nourishing the cells. Significance now is that this fluid that comes out fills the spaces around the cells. The body isn't solid cells. The body is like a spongy network inside with matrix, they call it, with just like a sponge with cavities in it. And the fluid coming out of the blood vessels goes through the sponge. And cells are embedded in the sponge. So as the fluid is going through the sponge, the cells can use the nutrients and oxygen in that fluid. So this is how the cells get nourished. Well, the problem for the immune system is this is a very rich environment for invasive organisms. If a bacteria could get into that body, it would be nourished by your effort to eat and create the building blocks of life. So you would be feeding an invasive population. So the job of the immune system is a whole series of cells that travel through the body. And what do they look for? Anything that's creating a disturbance from homeostasis. And the immune system's job then is to eliminate those things, whether it's something foreign that came in or even one of your own cells that has gone rogue. Okay, so that's the function of the immune system. And I said, well, how does it work? I said, well, look, let's go back to the aquarium story right now. And the cells are represented by the fish. The matrix where the fluid is represented by the fluid in the aquarium, okay? The pump that has been circulating the fluid is the equivalent of the circulatory system, heart and blood vessels. I say, so what's relevant? I say, now take a perspective from an invasive organism. An invasive organism can end up in either of three different places, just as we've illustrated. It could go into the fluid part in the matrix and just sit there and take all the nutrients out of the fluid. Or an organism like a bacterium can infect a cell and live inside the cell. Well, guess what? Now it's protected from the immune system because it's not out in the matrix. It can't be seen by the immune system, but it's inside a cell, taking over the function of that cell and living off of that cell. And a third place for an infection is not only did it come into the fluid, but it got picked up by the vascular system, the circulatory system. I say, why is that relevant? Well, that's the richest source of nutrients of all, and it also goes through the entire body. So if an invasive organism is in the blood, it can be distributed anywhere throughout the body and take over. This process is called sepsis. This is the most disturbing form of inflammation because you're feeding everything with the purest nutrients in the blood and giving an opportunity to be distributed throughout the entire body. So I say, well, then we have to deal with these infections. And the two primary infection sites are either in the matrix where the fluid is or inside the cells. There are two main cell types in the immune system that deal with this. There's a whole community, but two main characters that we talk about. The lymphocytes are the scuba divers that come into this matrix, one set T cells, examining the health of the body cells as to whether they're healthy or infected. One of them is called a B cell, which means bone marrow derived cell, a cell that evolved in the bone marrow, in the red bone marrow, which is generating blood cells. It generates these white cells called B lymphocytes. What's their function? The function of a B lymphocyte is to go through the matrix and identify anything that doesn't belong there by glomming onto it with receptors. And then this invasive thing, which we collectively call an antigen, the B cell has a surface receptor that could plug into that antigen, like a lock and key. And if it can do that, then that B cell is stimulated to make more of these receptors, but release them free. So they're floating in solution. So wherever that target was, the free-floating antibodies, they're called, can attach to the target, mark that target for destruction, and other cells like macrophages will take the marked structures with antibodies and devour them and break them down and protect you. So yes, antibodies are created by B cells by recognizing a foreign antigen, modifying the receptor so that it becomes a perfect fit for that antigen, and then reproducing those receptors but releasing them out into the fluid, in the blood, serum, and in the lymph. And these antibodies floating around, if they ever encounter the antigen that precipitated them, those antibodies will bind to it, mark it for self-destruction. And that's how we eliminate it. But now we're left with the last part, and that is what? What if the infective agent is inside the cell? Antibodies can't get inside the cell. So how do I deal with an infection inside of a cell? I said a second group of immune cells are called T lymphocytes. And that stands for thymus-derived lymphocytes. I said, what's their function? Well, these lymphocytes go around and can read the health of any cell in your system by looking at the surface of that cell. Is it a healthy cell or is it an infected cell? Well, the T lymphocyte can distinguish between them. And when it finds an infected cell, the T lymphocyte cell itself kills the infected cell, which then wipes out the infection. So I have two main cells that part of the immune system. B cells, which release antibodies which float through the system, marking invasive organisms and marking them to be eliminated. Or T cells, which are capable of traveling among all the cells and testing their surfaces to see, are these cells infected? And then the job is to eliminate an infected cell using the T cell to actually kill the infected cell. So we have T and B cells running through our body with an intelligence. Their targets were identified. And when a target is identified, for example, by a B cell, it causes the B cell to reproduce and create lots of versions to do what? Make lots of antibodies to go through the system and protect us. And then there are memory B cells and memory T cells. After the infection is gone, these memory cells hold on to the history of what happened. And if that invasive organism ever shows up again, instantly the cells will be prepared to fight that. And that's called immunological memory. The immune system's job is to move through the biology of the body, through the matrix where the fluids are, or by identifying the individual cells comprising the body, read for the expression of an infection, and then identify the antigen causing an infection, and then create a complement, be it an antibody or a surface receptor on a T cell, that when recognizing the foreign element will mark it and then kill it and protect us. And this is the function of the immune system. And the primary part of the immune system isn't even the T and the B cell. The primary part is not even part of the immune system. It's the barrier that prevents 99.99% of infective agents from coming in. So I go, okay, let's take the story and put it in today's context of the COVID inflammation. I say, so how does it work? A COVID is a virus. What's a virus? A virus is a device that carries memory that plugs into a cell and transfers the memory into the cell, and the transferred memory takes over the function of the cell. So a virus redirects the function of your cells to do what? Make more viruses. So a virus infects a cell, and then the cell creates more viruses. And when the cell has so many viruses in it, the cell breaks down, dies, releases the new viruses, which then go on and infect new cells, and it's a perpetuation machine. I say, so let's understand COVID, the mechanism, because it's very important at this time. Number one, the COVID virus is called a cold virus. I say, what does cold have to do with it? And the answer is this. When the virus injects its information into the cell, that reproduction of the virus occurs at a temperature lower than body temperature, 98.6 Fahrenheit, for example. Viruses in the cold version don't actually develop very quickly at body temperature. They develop at colder than body temperature. I say, where in the body is the temperature colder? I go, the respiratory system, because the respiratory system is taking cold air from the outside, bringing it into the lungs, and having to warm it up to body temperature so it doesn't shock the system. But that means the air that's coming into the respiratory system is colder than 98.6 degrees. Relevance? If the virus coming in that air hits the surface cells in the respiratory tract, they'll infect them and they'll be able to grow, and especially in the wintertime, because the air is even colder when it's coming in, the cold air dropping body temperature down to an adequate temperature for reproducing the viruses. So viruses grow like this in the cold. Okay? Well, imagine you just breathed in a COVID virus. And I say, where's it going to go? It's going to go down the respiratory tract. And I say, what's its function? The virus, like a memory stick, plugs into respiratory lining cells, the epithelium, the barrier that was protecting you. Of all the barriers protecting the body from outside influences, the thinnest of all barriers is the respiratory tract. And the reason why it's so thin, what's the function? It's to allow oxygen to move from the environment into the red cells and allow carbon dioxide in the red cells to be released by going back into the air again. So in the lung are these structures like balloons called alveoli. And alveoli are like balloons that blow up when you breathe and contract when you exhale. And so every time you breathe, you can bring in bacteria and viruses such as the COVID. So you breathing, the COVID virus comes down the throat. It's a colder temperature than the rest of the body. The COVID virus has a plug that matches the barrier of the alveolus. And I say, so what does it do? Well, it invades the lining of the respiratory tract. Then what? Well, it proliferates. Then what? It causes the lining cell to break down. Well, if the lining cell breaks down, there's a secondary consequence. That is, now the outside environment is no longer being walled off by an epithelium. The outside environment can now enter into the body. And guess what is the closest thing right there? The blood vessels, which were bringing red cells near the air so oxygen and CO2 can exchange with each other. And I say, then what happens? Well, the viruses cause the destruction of the lining, but the destruction of the lining opens the system to further infection. So viruses that were reproduced in that dying epithelial cell, some of them go in, some of them go out. The ones that go out in your respiration. So when you breathe, you release viruses. But some of the viruses go in when the lining got opened up. And then what? Well, now that you opened up the lining, not only did viruses go in, but bacteria and other agents that are in the air can now also go into the body. So now there's a second part of the problem. The first part was I destroy the lining cells with the virus, COVID virus. The second part of the problem is now that the lining cells are destroyed, I've opened the doorway for invasive organisms to come in and take over the system. And that's where respiratory distress comes from. I go, well, what's respiratory distress? breathing becomes difficult. I go, how come breathing is difficult? Go back to the original story. The alveoli, the bubbles are like balloons. They expand when you breathe in and they contract when you breathe out. But I said, but when the lining cells of the alveolus come off, the fluid in the body, remember the aquarium? The fluid of the aquarium starts to come out, and what does it do? Fills up the balloon with fluid. I go, why is there a problem? I say, air is supposed to be in the balloon so that the air can transfer oxygen and CO2. But when the alveoli become with fluid, air can't get in there. And I say, what's the consequence? You can't get fresh oxygen because the air can't go through all the water to bring oxygen into the blood. And all of a sudden you have to breathe harder, distress, respiration. And the more the infection takes place, the more the fluid comes into the alveoli, the less you're able to breathe. And there's a point where if you can't get enough oxygen in the system, it leads to death. That basically what it's doing is it's attacking the lining cells, allowing the reproduction of the viruses, but simultaneously causing the lining cells to break down, opening the body to the outside expression of organisms coming in. And a secondary consequence of COVID is now the infection that has taken place because the barrier lining has broken down. So COVID didn't kill you directly, but COVID can lead to a worse situation involving failures of respiration and increased infections. Those are the elements that become lethal. So then I say, well, what about the immune system? And I go, well, the job of the immune system is to identify those cells that are infected with viruses and kill them before the viruses can reproduce. And if the immune system gets ahead of the game, it can keep killing any infected cell, replacing it with a normal cell before the viruses have a chance to replicate. So that's when the immune system is working. What if you compromise the immune system? I said, what do you mean? What if you have something else going on that is demanding out of the immune system a lot of function? And then you get an infection. I said, well, now the immune system can't work up to its full capability because you're subdividing its effort. So when we have a chronic illness, for example, a chronic illness is debilitating the immune system. Why? It's using it to fight cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, whatever else is going wrong in the system. Now COVID comes in, I'm compromised, I don't have a full active immune system to fight the COVID, and as a result, the COVID can start to reproduce faster than my immune system can keep up with it because of the compromised influence. And then all of a sudden, well, how is this going to work out? Well, it's a race. It's a race between the virus replicating, causing more damage, and a race between the immune system capable of tooling up to fight that infection, to stop it before it overtakes the system. Why is the COVID such a big problem? Well, number one, because we don't have an immunological memory of an earlier infection by this particular virus. So that means we're not prepared if this virus shows up to deal with it. We have no previous experience. So everyone is essentially now a person that can get COVID because we don't have an immunological memory. So this is the big problem. But part two is, yes, I can get the infection, but now the outcome is based on, is my immune system compromised? Older people in nursing homes are already compromised. People with chronic diseases, in fact, in the United States, 40% of the population has 2 or more chronic diseases that interfere with the function of the immune system and compromise it. The lethality in the United States is different than other places because we are not in harmony to support our immune system. So now what we're facing is a virus that hasn't been around. Everybody is susceptible to the virus because it hasn't been around, so there's no previous immunological memory. When this first came, the number of cases that were affected were so many that they put a stress on the healthcare system, where the system couldn't keep up with the number of people being infected by the COVID virus. Then there was an idea. What if we have a lockdown and take all the people and put them away? And that way we would slow down the pace of the COVID infection, giving the healthcare system an opportunity to catch up. But then there was some idea that now that that lockdown group has been put out of commission, in a sense separate from the COVID virus infection, You think, well, does that protect them because they've been in lockdown? I go, no, they just don't get to see the virus. And I go, well, what's the consequence? I said, the virus didn't go away because people went into lockdown. So what would you expect to happen when you open up the doors and let people come back out? Of course, there would be another spike. Why? The virus is still here, and here's a whole fresh population that's never even been exposed to it. And we are now in that second spike. Does it mean the virus is more virulent? I said you just kept the susceptible people out of the picture and then reintroduced them again. And so the second spike is not a surprise. It is an anticipation. What is the problem? I said the race between the virus replicating and the immune system capable of catching up is based on how can I increase the effectiveness of the immune system to get ahead of the virus and shut it off? And the answer is, well, there are 4 fundamental things to enhance your immune system. And these 4 fundamental things, number 1, include providing nutrition. The immune system uses so much energy that out of your nutrition, if you are sick, most of that energy is going into the immune system function. So therefore, it becomes incumbent upon us to make sure we have proper nutrition that feeds us, and that means eating really healthy, organic, natural food, and not industrial farm food, which itself is toxic. Number 2, today's foods don't provide us with all the vitamins and supplements necessary to maintain a healthy body. So in addition to eating well, then taking supplements such as vitamin C enhances the effectiveness of the immune system. Vitamin D enhances the effectiveness of the immune system. Interesting, human populations, especially in the States, are very low in those 2 vitamins. Without them, we are compromising the immune system, so taking vitamins and supplements adds to our health. Thirdly, exercise. You go, why? Because exercise is moving the blood, oxygenating it, moving things around, cleaning the lymph of the body, filtering out things, which is different than a sedentary person. The movement of the body is facilitating the movement of the circulatory system and the lymphatic system, and especially the immune system. And then the most important thing we must understand in enhancing the immune system, and that is stress hormones shut down the immune system. Now that sounds like punishment, and I go, no, it's actually an intelligent part of the system. If you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and you have an infection, remember, the amount of energy used by the immune system is so great that when many people get sick, they don't even have the energy to get out of bed. So the relevance about all this is we don't want stress hormones in there because the function of the stress hormones is to conserve energy to run away from a saber-toothed tiger by shutting off functions not necessary to escape the tiger. And that means shutting down the immune system. Stress hormones are so effective at shutting down the immune system that medical practitioners use stress hormones when they transplant a foreign organ from a donor into recipient. They give the recipient stress hormones. Why? To shut down the immune system to protect the newly transplanted foreign organ. So, my goodness, the effectiveness of stress and shutting off the immune system, it's used therapeutically. What's the point? Watch the news. Go on the internet, read the stories. Just start looking out your window and see all the crazy stress-provoking things going on. I say, that itself is increasing the virulence of the COVID because the stress is preventing the immune system from fully functioning. And these are the 4 elements that will help you. And I say, well, how effective is it? And I say, up to 80% of the people are infected, but don't really show the symptoms. A mild fever, nothing serious. Only a smaller percentage are serious. I say, what's the difference? The large group, their immune systems are intact. Eating well, taking vitamins and supplements, exercising, and being free of stress means that they can be infected by the COVID virus and not have any real adverse effects that would cause them to go see a doctor or go to a hospital. The small percentage that is affected, the reason they're affected and having a negative consequence is their immune system is not working up to full capacity. They are compromised. While 40% of the American population have 2 chronic illnesses that compromise the immune system, 60% of the American population have at least 1 chronic illness, so up to 60% of Americans are already compromised in their ability to withstand this infection. And when you are in a state of health, this infection is so minor that many people didn't even know they were infected. The high death rate, yes it is, but that's not a reflection of the virulence of the COVID as much as it is a reflection of the compromised health systems of those infected. In conclusion, the fear that has been motivated by the media that this is so deadly is not accurate. It's really affecting those people who are compromised. And if we make efforts on our part to take care of our immune system, then we will not be subjected to the virulent activity that could lead to death in those people that are compromised. We are capable of having a strength to resist the influence of the COVID virus.
În următorul videoclip, Bruce Lipton ne prezintă ce înseamnă o viață în fericire și armonie, care este ingredientul secret al acesteia și cum ne putem crea realitatea de care avem nevoie.
You know, frequently I'm asked every day, how come you look so happy? And the answer is, I wake up happy. And why do I get this happiness? Where's it coming from? And the answer is this: it's another day on planet Earth. And what's so exciting about it is it's another day that I have no idea what's going to happen, but the greatest wishes and desires for some fun and excitement and a very joyous life. So I start off with, today's going to be a great day. And almost every day it ends up being a great day. Doesn't mean everything works right, but the beautiful part about it is I've really learned not to carry anything forward that is not really happy and joyous in my life. It reminds me of a story. Two Buddhist monks are walking along, and Buddhist monks are not allowed to touch women at all. And these two Buddhist monks are walking along, and they come to a river, and at that river there's a woman dressed in her wedding finery, and she's crying. And she's crying because she can't get across the river wearing these clothes. So one of the monks just picks her up, carries her across, drops her off on the other side. Then the two monks continue walking. And about an hour and a half down the road, one monk says to the other one, "How could you pick up a woman?" And the one who picked up the woman looked at him and said, I dropped her off an hour and a half ago. Why are you still carrying her? And the whole idea about that is, the meaning of it is, when events happen in our life, it's not necessary to keep carrying them, especially if they're negative ones. You can just stop right there and go on to the next thing. It's a choice. Do I want to be in an environment where I'm not happy, or do I want to be in an environment where I am happy? Oh, choice? Well, obviously. But most of us have that choice, but are so caught up in conventional rules and conventional way of mannerisms and social structure that we hold ourselves in places we don't even want to be. And then we sit there in our mind getting aggravated by the whole fact of, I don't even want to be here. And I go, well, then guess what? Choice. Pick a place you want to be. Go to the movie. Go do something else. Break the pattern. And when you break the pattern is your moment of power. Because when the pattern is broken, there's new choices at that moment. But if you don't break the pattern, you're going to follow a litany of up or down, depending how you started off the process. The litany down, not a great trip, I'll tell you that. But hey, I think it's over 20 some years, I haven't been depressed. I haven't even been angry. I get upset by some things, of course, but it doesn't mean I hold them. I drop that person off on the other side of the river and stop carrying it. And this is the choice. It really is a choice. You have to think about it, because it's a conscious awakening at a moment that gives you a choice, that wakes up and goes, do I want to do this? And that's that moment of choice. You take that moment of choice, and then you say, I'm moving into where I want to go. You make a habit out of this because you repeat this. And then guess what? You don't even have to think about it anymore, because the subconscious program will always redirect you to the place you want to be. And the whole other world that we used to experience, that used to irritate us and aggravate us and all that anxiety stuff, it just doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean everything's going right. But the whole beautiful part about it is, well, if it doesn't go right, okay, stop now, let's go do something else. Because it's the idea, it didn't go right, and then why didn't it go right, and who didn't make it right, and where's it going to go now, and blah, blah, blah. And what are you doing? You're digging a hole. And it's not going up, it's going down. And the whole idea is choice. But the most important part of choice is you have to stop long enough, not get caught up in the program and play out the program. There's a moment while you're playing the program, maybe you can separate and look at yourself and say, why am I doing this? Because that is the moment of power. That is the moment where you can say, I have a choice. I can do something totally different than to stew in this stuff. And then you are a powerful person.
Acestea au fost doar câteva din numeroasele videoclipuri produse și prezentate de profesorul de biologie Dr. Bruce Lipton și sper că au conturat câteva idei despre modul în care ar fi bine să abordăm viața, biologia, credințele și realitatea de care avem nevoie. Fiecare avem propriile repere de viață, propriile valori față de care ne raportăm și pe care le urmăm, avem propriile credințe și toate acestea la un loc conturează modul în care viața noastră se derulează. Dacă lucrurile nu merg așa cum ne-am dorit, atunci avem nevoie de schimbări în stilul de viață. Cu cât mai grave sunt aceste probleme, cu atât mai intense, profunde și dificile vor fi aceste schimbări. Așa că avem nevoie de exemple vii care să vină din partea celor care au reușit, iar Bruce Lipton este cel mai bun exemplu pe care vi l-am putut oferi în nenumerate episoade difuzate până în prezent. Vă mulțumesc pentru faptul că vizionați această emisiune în fiecare săptămână la TVR Cluj sau online pe internet și vă invit data viitoare la o nouă întâlnire cu emisiunea noastră preferată, Știință și Cunoaștere.